We're here at the Jones Real Estate CRE Deal, the commercial real estate podcast. However, we have the great Tom Morris on here today. Now, I know we try to have real estate guests here, but we feel Tom's got as many, if not more, experience in business and life than most. So great to have you on board, Tom.
Hannah's, I never thought I'd be on a commercial real estate podcast, but anything for you. So it's good to be here. What an honour. And I've seen some clips on social. It's a very professional production as well. So yeah, it's good to be here.
Nah, thanks for having you on board. I think we just might start with your journey, obviously going through school and now well and truly one of the better sports journalists in the country. Take us through your journey through school and then where you are now.
Well, I remember playing footy and cricket against you at school, that's for sure. I don't know if you remember, but in year 8, we played on the small oval at Xavier.
The Chapel?
The Chapel Oval. And you guys beat us by 17 points, but we played pretty well. Like this day, we played well. You beat us. Henry Hanlon, actually, was a mate of mine, tagged you this day. And we always thought we were a chance to get you on the return bout at Flack Park about 2 months later. And we did. Chris Bailey was unbelievable down the wings. And we beat you at Flack, big open fields. I'll never forget that. That was such a satisfying win on the return game. But in the summer, a few months earlier, we played on, is it the Plunkett down there? Is the Plunkett the main or?
Oh, it's one of
the other lower ovals. And I know this is not what the pod's about, but I want to say it anyway.
I was going to say we're digressing here, like we did in Trade Radio for about 4 weeks. We'll come back, but finish the story.
But I always knew you as a footballer. But you made 50 against us in the cricket. Hit a couple of towering sixes. I'm sure you remember that innings and batted beautifully. We won, but you batted really well.
I think I played and missed about 16 times.
Yeah, I was keeping
and then I ran out Dan Curtin as well.
You ran out Curto, which was satisfying for us. But then in year 12, you'd actually debuted for the Sydney Swans.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, you were then playing against us in school footy a couple of weeks later.
Yep.
And we sent Matt Carl on to you as a tagger.
Yeah.
And we beat you guys. And you guys had an AFL player in your team being you. So that was satisfying. But the rivalry was always strong. And at school, I always had this passion for playing sport, knowing that I'd probably never be an elite athlete, but I always wanted to get to the best level I could. And I always liked English and history, and I didn't like politics as a subject until year 11. I had a fantastic teacher who made me interested in sort of world events when I hadn't been before then. Geography, so all the humanities I really liked. I knew I didn't like maths. I was no good at it. I didn't like science. I was no good at it. I wish I liked languages, but I just couldn't get myself going. So I always felt like I wanted to do journalism of some sort. But as you know, back then, the journalism world was TV, radio, and newspapers. And nowadays, it's fragmented so much more. So I never would have believed that the majority of my stories that I'm breaking at the age of 33 are actually on Twitter. Something that. Well, did it exist in 2009? If it did, not many people had it. Facebook was in its infancy.
I think 2010s was when it almost 10, 11, 12 was.
That's
right. When Twitter
and
started.
Instagram, I think I got in 2012 or 2013. So I remember them saying to us at school, the careers counsellor said, half of you, 1 and 2, will have a job at the age of 35 that either doesn't exist now or exists in a completely different form. And I remember thinking, that's cool. And it's exactly how it's played out. Yes, I'm on TV and I write for a website. Websites existed then, but social media has changed the whole game. And I love what I do. It's hard, as you know, like we work together on Trade Radio. It can be pretty brutal, but to be able to talk about footy and cricket all day is just such a privilege. And it's something I did at school. I just talked about footy and cricket all day, and now I get to do it for a job.
And in regards to some of those hard, challenging moments, obviously speaking to you at more recent times, doing a Trade Radio stint was quite impressive.
You were great on Trade Radio.
It was impressive to see the way you went about things. Obviously, when you break stories, you have to have absolutely undeniable doubt that it's 110% true.
Yep.
How challenging has it been at times, whether it be relationships you've had with players or coaches, where you've got a story and you know for a fact it's absolutely true, and you obviously have to report it by virtue of the fact of your role. How hard's that been, and what are some of the challenges you faced doing that, and then post that as well with some of the relationships that may or may not have been frayed?
It's a really good question because you constantly, the first thing is to weigh up whether something's true or not. And what I learned as a young journalist is just because someone's telling you something that they believe is true, it doesn't mean it necessarily is true. Like I got told yesterday, categorically, that Matt Rowell has bought a house in Ivanhoe. Okay. So it's not I don't think it's a massive story regardless. You might just say he's buying it for an investment. But either way, an out of contract player that's buying a house in a state where clubs want him is worth a mention somewhere.
Yep.
This person told me categorically he's bought a house. I went and chased it up. He hasn't bought a house. I mean, this is a real estate podcast. He's looking at houses, but he hasn't actually purchased one yet. So a younger me might have just gone with a story based on the fact that the person who was telling me was so categoric, but they got it wrong because they don't have that threshold, that journalistic threshold of truth, which is really important. And you saw it in the trade period. Just because people are telling you things doesn't mean they're necessarily 100% right. Like if you told me that you've done your hamstring and I can report it, I'll report it because you haven't got that wrong. But if you've told me that you think a teammate has hurt his calf, I might have to follow that up because it might not be a calf, it might be an Achilles. So it might be something else. And that's the really tough balance.
And in regards to, probably on this, and we're moving onwards in regards to staying on the same path, so to speak, reporting of different plays, injuries, pre-game and stuff. There was a few incidents with Bevo over the journey.
Yes.
Obviously that relationship's an interesting one.
Yeah.
Can you take us through that?
Yeah, for sure. Even this week I had an interesting one as well because I reported that the Northern Bull Ants were no longer interested in Taron Thomas.
Yep.
Which is a delicate topic to talk about. But I was unaware when I reported it that Taron Thomas hadn't been told yet. I only found out after. So I felt a sense of guilt that in effect I was the one that told Taron Thomas that his VFL dream, if you can call it that, is over. But in many respects, that's not really my job. My job is to report the truth and be accurate and be consistent, which is what I did. But there's still human lives at stake as well. So you've got to weigh that up. And there's plenty of stories that I haven't gone with over the past that are more delicate than the Taron Thomas stuff because you don't want to ruin a relationship or it might involve mental health or something to do with a family member and you just don't touch it. But, the meat and potato stories, the ones that you just do without even thinking twice, the selection stories. Selection stories like Lachie Hunter, who's not playing for the Western Bulldogs, or in the grand final the year before when Ryan Gardner was dropped because Alex Keith was coming back in. That's just, as soon as you find out that's true, you just report it because selection in all sport is always a story, whether it's cricket or soccer or whatever sport it is, selection is a story, which is why I've spoken about it publicly before. I've got no hard feelings towards Luke Beveridge at all. Because there's plenty of coaches that have defended their team in front of the media. I can only imagine what it would have been like being a journalist when Mick Malthouse was roaring at Collingwood or when Lee Matthews was at the Brisbane Lions or Collingwood before that or Kevin Sheedy at Essendon. But for him to pick out the biggest issue with me that I'm reporting a selection story, to me was just bizarre. The selection stories were accurate and they're not massive stories anyway. They're not huge narratives that change the face of the AFL. Lachie Hunter not playing is something that I'd spoke about on air, but it's not going to win you an award. So that's almost 3 years ago now. And I've said a number of times to people at the Bulldogs and anyone who wants to hear it that if Bevo was here, I'd shake his hand and say g'day. I've got no hard feelings towards him at all. I'm not sure it's reciprocated, but I'd be happy to have that conversation.
In regards to, I guess, professionalism and a personal brand, not just from an AFL sense or in our sense now in the commercial real estate world, you've got a brand, you've got to build it up, you've got to try and build your name up and your reputation. Certainly from your end, you did that. You were a young journalist, you worked your way up, you were just about on everything, you were killing it at Fox Footy. Obviously then went through some really tough personal challenges, went away and then you've now had to rebuild yourself back up. I guess you would have had a lot of learning during that experience. So I'll touch on that and I guess what you went through and then obviously where you are now.
I think the main thing I learned in that experience is that I think at Fox, I probably felt like I was walking on water. Like I sort of knew everything. I was working with some amazing people, not just on camera, but also off camera. I was living my dream, working cricket and footy. And there's no doubt I got ahead of myself, which I think a lot of young people do. And a lot of, and you would have felt this as a footballer as well. You have times in your career where you get brought back down to earth for whatever reason. The shame for me is that I got brought back down to earth and there's so much collateral damage around that. There's lots of people in business or work they go through a tough time and only them and their close friends or family know and then they build themselves back up and they learn from it. But for me, this became like, a big public thing. And I've said it a number of times before, like I've only got myself to blame for it. But in that experience, there's no doubt that while it was hugely regrettable and clearly negative, the way that I've learned from it has been hugely beneficial. Like I'm a far better person now. I'm more pragmatic. I'm more balanced, I think. I'm certainly a better family person. I'm a better journalist. So I would prefer it never happened, clearly, because there was so much collateral damage. But if I was going to take any positives out of it, it's that I'm better in all those areas now. And I've still got really good relationships with people at Fox. I love my time at Fox, but Channel 9's been incredible. Like Channel 9's a big commercial network. Wide World of Sports is this brand, to use that word, that has stood the test of time ever since cricket in the Kerry Packer days. So it's just a privilege to be able to work at all. I thought I was done. I thought I wasn't going to get a job again in sports media. And for 18 months, that was the case. So for Hutchie to give me a go at SEN, where I'm now working with you a little bit, and for Channel 9 to give me a go, I don't take that for granted. And there's no doubt, in hindsight, I took the role at Fox for granted, which led to me just behaving disgracefully, which is something that I regret all the time. But eventually in these situations, when you go through times of despair, and again, you've been through difficult times, you have to be able to forgive yourself to a point. You can't just continually put your head on the pillow and feel shit about yourself every single night. So that took time. It took a lot of work. I had a lot of support from people. And it's still there. Like it's still part of my history and it's still something I regret, but I've been able to push on and be the best person I can be now, which has made me a better journo and a better friend and a better family person as well.
Absolutely. And you're obviously well and truly now, as you said, family man, SEN, football, cricket, you're doing it all. How do you manage your time amongst all those different realms? Obviously cricket and footy, obviously different seasons.
Yeah.
But even being face-to-face with you during trade radio, constantly on the phone. Yeah. Sometimes I've had to take control of the show live, which has been daunting.
You did a great job, by the way.
Whilst you're making calls and trying to find ins and outs. How do you, certainly from a commercial, trying to link it back to commercial real estate, time management's a big thing. For us, something I'm still trying to learn, organisation and stuff. How do you manage your time between family and all the different sort of realms of journalism that you have to deal with?
Because Bridget and I have a baby now as well, so we've got an 8-month-old.
Yeah.
Which has added another layer of complexity. Clearly, people have families all the time, but when you first, anyone who's had kids would know when you have your first, it takes some adjustment. You got to readjust what your priorities are, and how you plan and how you organise things. The phone's a big one, and you would know it as well. It's like you never know when your last story is going to be, and I've got this enduring nightmare that I won't be able to. I'm done. I'm out of stories. I'm going to offer nothing, which is really quite depressing and disheartening to go through. Even though, I think rationally, I know that things happen. There's going to be an MRO incident on the weekend. There'll be an injury. I'll be able to talk to someone. Then there'll be a story to get. There'll be trades, but you just never know when your last story is going to be. Which means that I'm always in the footy season, especially near my phone. And, it's just screen time's 8 or 9 hours a day. In trade period, it was sort of 12 or 13 hours a day. I know the NBA reporters, it's 20 hours a day. So I'm not at that level. And I'm not trying to pretend that I work harder than anyone else, but this is the job right here. So, it's been led by Bridget, but I've had to be part of it as well, clearly, because it's a collaborative approach is to, when I get home, I just can't be on my phone. We've got stuff to do. We've got family stuff to adhere to and other priorities to attend to, which is far more important. Family's more important than work.
But then you missed that there was one night from memory that you put your phone in airplane mode for half an hour.
Yeah.
And then you turned it back on and you realised you'd missed the story.
Yeah, what was the story? I remember I spoke to you about that.
You spoke to me about it at Trade Radio. You missed the story or you had it.
I remember it.
You had an inkling?
It was the big 3 club trade, Collingwood, Gold Coast, Port, to Dan Houston to Collingwood and Noble to Gold. Anyway, and it fell over. And
you were on the pulse.
Yeah, I knew it was. I felt like it was going to fall over on the penultimate night of the trade period, or the last night of the trade, the night, the 24 hours before the deadline. And I was doing the nappy. And this is not an excuse or a complaint. I prioritize family, but I just put my phone on airplane mode and just dealt with that and missed the story. And that was a big story that night. And I just thought to myself, but if you actually reflect on it, it's just one story. It's not the end of the world. Someone else is going to get it anyway. The next day, you're back on the job. So that's been an adjustment, How do you, it's a 24/7 job. If someone texts me at 10 o'clock at night with a story, I've got to get up at my laptop. But, how do you prioritize those things and how do you balance it is a challenge. And I can't believe people that do it with 2 or 3 kids, I think one is a challenge, 2 or 3 and a social life and other family. It's awesome, but it's been an adjustment, that's for sure. Because in your 20s, and you would know this as well, you literally just do what you want. Like if I want to go get an acai bowl on a Sunday morning, I go and do it. I don't have to think about it. I have to pack a bag for the baby, I have to worry about the car seat. I just go and do it. If I want to go for a run, I don't worry about being injured because I'm young and fit. I can just go for a run. And if I want to go for a run tomorrow, I'll just go for another run tomorrow. If I want to go for a quick run, I'll just do that. Whereas now you just got to weigh everything up. And that's been an adjustment. It's been awesome, but I guess it's what it's like growing up, which is something that is, it's pretty humbling.
Has there been any, I guess, big stories in the last 6 months where you've really wanted to go with or report, or whether it be a close relationship you've had, or you feel like it's just not quite 100% factual, but then deep down you've just really wanted to go with it, but you've had to pull back? Probably not going to be able to report this live anyway.
Yeah,
so it's probably an interesting question.
Oh,
has there been a couple?
Across the cricket season, I'm trying to think of a couple across the cricket season. I mean, there was... Yeah, I mean, probably something close to I spoke to you about this actually. I hope you don't mind me saying on air. We can cut it out if it's no good. The John Longmire story.
Yep.
So I was hot on the fact that John Longmire was going to come back to training mid-January.
Yep.
He was burnt out. He had nothing left to give after the grand final. And Dean Cox was going to take over across the summer. Mm-hmm. John Longmire would pick up mid-January, take over. But before round 1, there'd be a succession plan announced that would see Cox take over at the end of 2025. A bit like what Port have done with Ken Hinkley and Josh Carr. And I was hot on that. I'm like, this is what's going to happen. But I just couldn't quite nail it. I couldn't quite confirm it. I knew that, don't ask me how, but I knew that Longmire was thinking that was the way it's going to work. That he'd come back late, they would announce that that'll be fine. But I just couldn't quite nail it. And then as it turned out, I'm lucky I didn't do it. Because the truth was that Longmire came back and went, actually, I'm done.
I'm done.
I'm out. So I'm thankful that I didn't jump at that. And that's an example of me being about 80% right. But if I go with that story, I'll look wrong. If I go with the story that John Longmire is considering his future, he's weighing up, a succession plan, that's right. But it's a bit soft, so I just left it.
Does young Tom Morris report that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And now obviously being a lot more experienced, knowing what you know.
Yeah, that's right.
And probably you're standing in the game of journalism's got to a level where you've got to be that much more on your game. You can't afford to leak that.
You got to filter, what's important. Like if I had my time again, I would second guess reporting that you'd been cut from the leadership group at St Kilda.
Yep.
Like knowing you now and knowing how things work in clubs and what you were going through at the time, is that really a story that's worth going with? And I remember Dave O'Neill, the St Kilda media manager, tried to talk me out of it. He was like, "Oh, we'll give you an exclusive. We'll give you a chat." I was like, "Nah, I'm going with the story. That's what I'm doing."
Yeah.
So you learn things along the way. That was 2018. I would have been 26 or 27. Not saying now you can't,
obviously it was correct. So I did get pulled out of the leadership group.
Yeah.
How did you find out that lead?
No, I can't tell you how I found it out. But what I do know is,
because obviously you worked at St Kilda and you obviously found it. You obviously had a way sometimes finding some stories at St Kilda at the time. I mean, that was obviously a pretty obvious one, and probably relatively, given the fact I came down from Sydney on a big contract. From your point of view, probably a relatively big story at the time.
It was it led Monday night on the couch.
Yeah,
because whether it was fair or not, you were a big name recruit that hadn't been able to get on the park because of your body on big money, and you were in the leadership group and you'd been ousted from the leadership group. Whether it's you or someone else, that's a story for the time. But now I reckon what I'd do is I would call you directly. I'd talk to you about it and work out a way that I can do the story and frame it in a way that you want. Whereas back then, you're told by media managers, don't talk to players.
Yeah.
Don't talk to players because they're the gatekeeper. This is not Dave O'Neill's fault, by the way. But now I'm probably more confident in myself just to call a player or text a player, which I've done in the last couple of years, which I think by and large players respect.
Yeah.
That they understand that actually going to them in a respectful way gives them an opportunity to talk to me and develop that trust. So that's probably how I would have handled the time if I had my time again.
No, 100%. I think knowing you now and working with you closely, having a different form of respect to the way you go about things, I reckon certainly if I was playing again, I think that would make me feel a lot more confident.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, building that rapport or trust, a bit like in our industry with commercial real estate, with clients and whatever else, you need to build that rapport and trust.
Yeah.
I think that you'd be more willing to actually work with you synergistically to come up with a way of, right, you're probably going to report the story anyway, if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Let's try and work out a way to make it in a way that suits both of us.
And rather than through your manager or through the media manager, let's just talk directly off the record about how we can work through a situation. And I assume it's the same in real estate, but certainly in journalism, sometimes you get the best stories because you haven't gone with a story beforehand. So if I decide in that scenario, actually, Dan, I'm going to sit on this. I'm not going to go with it. That's fine. Who knows what sort of level of trust you and I develop? And then 6 months later, you might say, hey, have you heard this at the Swans? My mate's saying this at the Swans. This is a mammoth story. And you're doing me a favor because I've done you a favor earlier. So there's a bit of that as well. So you've got to weigh up, whether the juice is worth a squeeze and whether the story is going to be worth it. Yeah,
well, I guess quite often you'd be working with clients from our end where obviously as an agent you want to get the sale and get the commission, but quite often the advice would be, Paul or Dan or Tim, or Luke, do we really sell this at the moment? And it might be like, actually, no, at the moment, the best opportunity would be to hold, release it or sell it in 12 months' time or 2 years' time or whatever, build that rapport. Quite often that allows them the confidence that we're not forcing them to make a decision, but they might end up selling anyway. But once again, you build that trust.
That's tough though, isn't it?
It is tough to do.
Because you get a short-term sugar hit and in your case, a financial hit. In my case, a endorphin about breaking a story that day, or endorphins breaking that story that day. And the news is on every night. There's a 6 p.m. news every night. So how are you going to fill that bulletin?
That's right.
If you've got something on a platter, saying no to it is actually really tough, but you sort of have to do it sometimes.
Yeah, I guess that long-term gain. I guess we mentioned Tim Spargo just then, the old man Peter Spargo, who's a client of Jones Real Estate. We spoke about Peter, even though I've never met Peter. We spoke about him a bit on the
Have
the
you
trade.
never met him?
I've never met Peter. We spoke about him a bit on Trade Radio.
Yeah.
The power broker at Melbourne.
Yes.
On that, how do we see Melbourne this year? You are a bit of a Melbourne fan.
I'm a Melbourne supporter, yeah.
And did you find it, like obviously there's a lot going on with Kristen Petrarca and going on there. There's a lot of stuff we were chatting about in regards to that in the off-season.
Yep.
Where do you see all that and where do you see Melbourne this year?
So Melbourne is a club that I've got a complex relationship with because...
So does Tim, by the way.
I'm sure. But as a kid, as most kids are, I was obsessed by Melbourne. I saw a photo the other day actually of all the old players catching up with Neil Danaher. And I'm looking at this photo going, it's Andrew Lancelli. It's the Wizard. It's Jeff Farmer. These heroes of mine as kids and are getting lunch with Neil Danaher. But then Melbourne were terrible, as you'd remember, from about 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13 sort of territory. And it became sort of so deflating to go to the footy and see them get absolutely done every single week. You sort of lose that real passion for it because they're so bad. And that's just being honest. I would love to say that I supported the club through thick and thin and that I went every game and that I cheered them on and it meant the world to me. But in the end, at that time of your life, when you're in your early 20s, you got other stuff on. Some days I thought, I'd just prefer to go play golf on a Sunday or do something else or see mates. And then I started working at St Kilda Footy Club, which was my first job in 2013, 14, 15. In fact, the day I got, my first day at the Saints was the day that Scott Waters got sacked. So I got an introduction that day. But when you're working at another club, you sort of lose that passion for Melbourne even more. I still cared about Melbourne, but I cared more about the people at the Saints because I was at the club. And then you become a journalist at Fox Footy and you don't have that love for your club that you support anymore because you're there to be impartial. And I lost that. I was very much a lukewarm supporter for a long period of time. 2021 grand final was great because it made me think of going to the footy with dad as a kid and being passionate. But Melbourne's still my footy club. And I think when Archie or any other kids we have grow up and hopefully they go for Melbourne, I'll rediscover that sort of love for it. But it doesn't affect my weekend like it did.
So was it hard reporting about the Petrarca stuff and he's leaving and trying to, because you weren't trying to bring the club down, but it obviously creates added pressure within
well, I get
the
accused
club.
by Melbourne supporters of being like a traitor. I'm like, unfortunately, like whether Melbourne win or lose has no impact on my weekend. And I wish I cared more. I care about Melbourne more than I care about other clubs, but it doesn't mean I'm actually emotionally invested like other supporters are. And that's sort of, I think that's important as a journalist to be like that.
See, if Carlton lose, it completely ruins Paul Jones' weekend, and Mondays are a nightmare in the office.
Well, they've got an interesting week coming up, don't they?
Yeah.
Their list is stacked. They've got no excuses.
I don't think he was happy that Jagger Smith did his ACL.
Shocking.
On the weekend.
So Melbourne, that's a long answer. In Melbourne short, like they're ready to go. Like Petrarca's happy, Clayton Oliver's fit, Gawn's probably another year or two of being at his best.
Yep.
Caleb Windsor is they've got good players. They're ready to go. They've got the key defenders ready to go. Last year they will be hoping that was an aberration. But if you agree that Melbourne are in the window, and you can probably skirt around the edges and suggest, well, maybe they aren't anymore, but they have been in the window since 2018. And in 2018 they made a prelim, lost to West Coast, got blown off the park. But since 2019 to the end of 2024, that's 19, 20, 1, 2, 3, 6 years. They've won 3 finals in 6 years. Yes, that includes a flag. Tick. Well done. But when you're in the window, to win 3 finals across 6 years is actually a terrible failure. So they will be hoping that this year they can get back and find the form they did a couple of years ago. They've got the players to do it, but it's going to be a very even comp.
You speak about someone who is a bit more invested of the Melbourne Demons, but I guess moving forward, between football and cricket, where do you see yourself from a journalist point of view over the next 5-10 years? Do you feel like you're going to keep doing the mix between both, or do you feel like you're going to go, I'm going to really hone in, focus on one specific sport?
Well, one thing I learned with Fox and what happened there is I can never look too far ahead because you can never take anything for granted. But I would like, in a perfect world, to have a mix between the two. I love cricket. Cricket's like my passion. Like I played at a high level of cricket than I did at footy. I don't know. I think footy's probably a better sport if I'm going to look objectively. There's more great footy games than there are great cricket games. But something about cricket I've just always loved. Cricket media is different. Being able to commentate cricket is something that I love. I don't want to commentate footy. But it's a perfect balance. I have full respect for the journos who do footy 11 months of the year. But from the end of the trade period until probably February 1, I'm not taking a lot of notice of the footy. Like I need a break. And doing cricket in that time makes me a better footy journalist. But now we're about to get into footy season. Like I'm all in. Like I'm ready to go. But if I'm watching the Australian Open tennis, I'm not thinking about which player is in career best shape on the track. Like it's not, that's probably because I really like footy and I love it as a job. And I watch 6 or 7 games a weekend at least. But cricket has always been my number one. And I think it's important. If I can have both, I will try to keep both.
And I guess just the last couple of questions. Do you remember the biggest story you broke of your journalistic career to this date?
Yeah, it's probably the story that Damien Hardwick was leaving Richmond, I reckon. Yeah. That was a Monday.
Yep.
I got wind of it. I got wind of the fact that Hardwick, so I got told on the golf course about a month earlier by a mate.
Who was the mate?
Can't tell you. You do know this person though, actually.
Right.
But I'm not going to tell you.
Yeah.
He said to me, just keep an eye on the fact that Hardwick's going to join Gold Coast. I thought to myself, that's ridiculous. He's coaching Richmond. He's got a year and a half left on his contract. And Dew's coaching Gold Coast, and he's also got a year and a half left or whatever he did. So, but anyway, I kept an eye on it. I thought it's interesting to say for this person that sort of is well connected. And then, I just managed to confirm on this random Monday it was about 6:30 p.m. And I wrote the article about 4 p.m. I thought it was the case, and I chased it and found it and ended up getting it that Hardwick would be quitting Richmond the next day. And Bridget, my wife, was in Perth for work. I just remember sitting at the laptop and being like, and my phone starts pinging. I'm like, oh God. And I knew I was right, but you still have that nervous feeling. And Caroline Wilson always says, she always says the biggest stories make you feel sick in the stomach. And I felt sick in the stomach this evening. So anyway, phone starts blowing up, like, whoa, what's going on? I mean, the story's going to get out some stage. It was going to get out the next day. So it's not like it was, 2 weeks early, but it was still a shock because no one had predicted it. And I tried to call Damien Hardwick. He didn't answer my call, didn't reply to my texts. I'm thinking, and I didn't have any relationship with Damien Hardwick, so you can see how I was, ended up getting it confirmed. And then Jared Waitley.
So you got to confirm. So you obviously got the inkling, and then you obviously did your DD, and you got it confirmed.
I got it.
a couple of times.
Yes, I needed to nail it.
Yeah.
But the problem with these stories is, and this is taking the sort of behind the curtain of journalism, if you talk to too many people about it, it gets out elsewhere.
Yeah, okay.
Like if I talk to 6 different people about Hardwick, one of them will talk to a journo, that journo will start chasing it. So you can be really careful who you talk to about stories to make sure that it doesn't get out. And then Jared Waitley went on AFL 360 at 7:30 and said, because I did it midway through on the couch. I think on the couch was 6:30 to 7:30. They couldn't confirm it on there. They said, Tom Morris is reporting this, but we haven't been able to confirm it. I thought, okay, let's just wait. And then Jared Waitley started 360, like, good evening. I'm Jared. This is Robbo. I can tell you that Damien Hardwick, Tom Morris is reporting this. I can tell you that Tom Morris is correct. Damien Hardwick will quit tomorrow. And I went, that's good. And then, that story changed because at the time I was working 1 day a week at SEN. So,
and that was obviously you went through those challenges at Fox Footy, and that was your first big story on the comeback trail.
Yeah,
is that right?
It's the biggest story I've ever got because no one saw it coming.
Yep.
But
that was also once you obviously had some time out of the game.
Yeah, the timing of it was significant because it meant people, whatever they thought of me as a person, which was valid at the time and still is valid now, I guess, is they thought, okay, well, he can do the job. But I'm not going to pretend I worked my ass off for it.
Yeah.
I got a bit lucky. I worked for a few hours on it and I got it. There's been plenty of stories that I've worked unbelievably hard for, like for weeks, and have been pipped at the post by someone else. So this was a confluence of things that came together and it worked out well. So I'll never forget that. And it was just an amazing evening seeing it all unfold. And
just last one, are there any stories at the moment you've got cooking up?
Always got stories cooking. You just don't know what's true and what's not.
Are there a couple of big ones that you feel like you're about to let go of in the next couple of weeks? Or are you sort of...
Well, put it this way, there's no stories that I'm 90% there and ready to drop tonight or tomorrow. But that can change in 2 hours or 3 hours. Who knows? You might tell me Buddy's making a comeback. I'm not sure he is, by the way. There's a lot of stories I'm sort of like 30 or 40% on the way to, but you just don't like it. Most of them end up as dead ends. It might be the same in your job, but 9 out of 10 stories that you're chasing end up as nothing. But it's the 1 out of 10 that you get that's worth it. So like yesterday, for example, I was driving to Icon Park because Tony Jones and I were doing a cross from there on Channel 9 News, and Richmond was playing Collingwood preseason game, and I had nothing to talk about, like nothing. I was driving thinking, what are we going to talk about? I've got to somehow fill 90 seconds with garbage, And it's not like people even care about the game anyway. Like I can say Perriman's playing, nice, well done, or Dan Houston or Tim Membry, but no one, like it's not even a real game. So I just thought I was going to make some calls here. So I made some calls, just having a chat to people, not asking for charity, but just like asking a few questions. Ended up finding out, not a big story, that Darcy Cameron's going to sign a 2-year extension beyond 2026, so at the end of 2028, and Collingwood want Bobby Hill to sign a 4-year extension. So that was enough. That gave me and Greg Swan at the Brisbane Lions as a CEO signed a 3-year deal, which puts him in line with Chris Fagan as the coach. So it sort of brings an end to their era. So that was enough to make me go to air. But there's this sort of anxiousness that what I'm going to talk about tonight doesn't stop. Like it's a new day now. And for tonight, at the moment, I've got precisely nothing to talk about. So it's just like, that's the challenge of the job. And I speak to other journos about that as well. Mitch Cleary feels the same. Some days you got some good stuff. Some days you got nothing and you got to manufacture, but either way, you got to be accurate.
Well, you've had plenty of good stuff to chat about today on the CRE deal, Tom. So thanks for coming and joining us. No doubt the guests would have got a lot out of that, and looking forward to catching up with you at some stage in future.
Thank you, Hannes. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, Tom.